Welcome to Brighter Morning with Bhoe. We're very glad to have you on board. MCTV, Multicultural TV, and new 97.5 Multicultural Radio, Hot Like Pepper Radio. Stay with us. We have some good discussion this morning. We are going to be discussing the whole situation of Venezuelan immigration to Trinidad and Tobago. And I know that that is something that interests a lot of you. We are going to get a perspective that basically is a perspective of an NGO dealing with Venezuelan immigrants every day. They have dealt with immigrants, refugees, displaced people from all over the world who come here to Trinidad and Tobago over time. And we will focus on that a little bit. And we have Dr. Roger Hussein. We have a clip from a presentation that he gave some time ago about the value that we can get out of Venezuelan immigration and the value that immigrants from Venezuela can get in Trinidad and Tobago, so that we have a good discussion there. But before I join my main guest this morning, I want to say a little word on something that happened close to us in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You know, that country has been going through a lot of trouble with the volcano, and then people living close to the volcano, moving people, and they've been going through a really rough time. And you have a challenge in that country also of people, a lot of people refusing to take the vaccine and so on. And the government took the decision that they would take the matter to the legislature to determine a policy and basically make it law. And what has happened there is not nice, really. A prime minister that has served that country for many, many years. I mean, somebody literally pelted a stone or a rock or something and burst his head. He had to be hospitalized. My understanding is that he has been flown to Barbados to get an MRI to make sure that he is okay. And I think we have to, check ourselves in the Caribbean, Either we want democracy and a free society and we want to be able to talk to each other and engage each other, or we want to get into violence and mash up the country. The whole Caribbean area, I've often had the issue of Haiti brought to the fore because I want to remind people that Haiti is a Caribbean country and that the violence and authoritarianism that has characterized that country for many years is a factor of Caribbean life. We in Trinidad and Tobago have had many different instances in which we have crossed the line here, and we will have some time to talk about those kinds of things. But is it really reasonable for us in trying to organize parliamentary democracies and trying to have constitutional provisions that protect human rights and individual liberty? If we are striving for those kind of societies, do we want to mash up the institutions that allow us to have those things? The parliamentary system, the reasonable relationship between government and opposition, the judiciary, which is another arm of a democratic state in which they basically interpret the laws that Parliament makes, and the executive, which derives out of the will of the people and are accountable to Parliament. Now, if there is a problem of executive accountability to Parliament, if there's a problem of issues in the society in which majority rule is used to overrun the democratic will of the people, that is another matter, and protest is legitimate. But I don't think we have to get to the point where you throw a stone at a prime minister and bust his head. I don't see what is the value of that, you know. And I want to say that violence has no place in the politics of the region. It is an unwelcome development. It is not that it is the first time it's here. It has always been here. You know, you have the gang involvement in the political parties of Jamaica. We know that it is a factor in Haiti. We know that it's a factor here in Trinidad and Tobago. And I have no doubt that those elements are also present in many, many Caribbean territories, possibly in St. Vincent itself. So I want to say, you know, either we have reasonable societies based on the principle of democracy, and we find a way of making that democracy work, or we degenerate into violence and we kill one another, and whatever happens at the end of the day, you know, some strong man rules. And I don't think we can have it both ways. And I really want to take the position that, you know, people who offer themselves for parliamentary office, I mean, it takes a lot of courage to do that. Not everybody is kind to you when you're a parliamentarian, whether you are in government or opposition. And you go and you seek the votes of people, and they put you in office. And there's a obligation there between leaders and the led, between the parliamentary representative and their constituents. And it is important to manage this relationship for the democracy to thrive. There is a certain level of responsiveness that is required in all of this, you know. And the way we conduct our business in Parliament too is also important. You know, if you create the conditions, and this has happened in other countries before, where parliamentarians have ended up fighting on the Parliament floor. Nothing like that has happened here in Trinidad and Tobago. But, I mean, sometimes the nature of the discussion in Parliament can be full of invective and very, very divisive. It is something that I spoke about when I was in Parliament. I do not understand this extreme partisanship that leads to division in the society, a society that is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, in which people live together in the communities. Why do politicians do that? I mean, I really find it irresponsible of them, regardless of which party they come from. So I want to say, tone it down in the Caribbean, you know. Let us build peaceful society. This COVID has taken us all to ground zero. We have to build a new society. It's not going to be easy. The economic condition of Caribbean societies, depending on what happens with COVID, and it looks like we're going to have to live with this for a little while. It is not going to go away. There's not going to be any restoration of normalcy where the disease, we are free of the COVID virus. It looks like it's going to be with us for some time. So we've got to manage this thing. How are we going to recover economically? You can't have government feeding the people for the rest of their lives. It's not possible. So what are we going to do? And therefore, I think we have to have serious discussions about this, because it can't be business as usual. We have got to find a way to navigate the future. So we will have some discussions about this during the week leading to Independence celebration on August 31st. But I just thought I should say this. I completely condemn the violence that took place in St. Vincent. Whether you like your prime minister or not, whether you belong to the prime minister's party or not, whether you belong to an opposition party or not, whether or not you are not a party member and simply an ordinary citizen who at election time chooses I don't think violence has any place in our democracy. And I want to say that our lines will be open. You can call. It is 609-6283, 609-6284. But we will go on now to our main guest this morning, who is Ms. Rhonda Maingot, and we want to ask her to join us on the set. Good morning.
Morning, Bhoe. Good morning.
Morning, Ms. Maingot. You mind if I call you Rhonda? You can call me Bhoe.
Absolutely.
And, we've known each other for some time, so I think that's okay.
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank you for all the good work that you have done in your life. I have known you involved in community work and helping people, and being involved initially in church work, and basically always having disposition to do good and to help people and to facilitate them to be better and to be on their feet. And I want to commend you on that. It is, it is a noble, noble task. And I want to ask you, how did you end up with this being your kind of life's mission before we get into the nitty-gritty of things?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, Bhoe. Thank you very much for having me on board this morning. I'm happy to be here. Yes, I've known you for many, many years. It goes back to our time. I remember in St. Augustine, early on, I was 17 or 18 years old. So many years ago, we knew each other. And I guess since then, I've always felt, that life, you had to be involved in life and do good. And when I was 28 years old, I had an experience with God in my life. And in one day, overnight, my life changed. Within a few days, I gave up my job and I sought what was this God who had captured my heart that night? What would he like me to do? And I sought that for a few years, and God guided me into this community, Living Water Community, to form this community, and as you say, to work with the poorest of the poor, the most needy in our society, and also, of course, spiritually to help people on their journey with God. So it's been an absolute blessing for me, for my life. It has been a gift that God has given to me, and I thank God, and also given me some wonderful people to journey with in all these years. One of them are you, Bhoe, and I treasure that. And it's lovely to share this time with you this morning.
No, and thank you for coming on. And as I said, thank you for your great work. But tell me about Living Waters, because we're going to talk about the Venezuelan immigration situation today. But this is only something that has happened that you are now dealing with. But when you started Living Waters, what was the intention, and what was the early kind of involvement with people trying to help them that you began with?
When we started the community, it was at the end of the 70s, early 80s. And if you remember that time, Trinidad was not in a good place at all, We were going through a very rough time, something like now, but not COVID. Economically, the country was really struggling. So there were many poor people on the fringes of society, people in need, and we began a ministry working with people on the streets initially, and that just led from one ministry to the next. We were always seeking to help those most in need, the most vulnerable, the poorest of the poor. We were always seeking to help people like that. And more people joined our community and participated in the work that we do over the years.
Yes. So it really started with Trinidadians and recognizing the fact that we have poverty in our country. and that somebody needed to tend to the poor.
Yeah.
And I know you did that, and you did that very well. And you have done that over the years. But over time, you became involved with migrants, right? And these are
Yeah.
people from all over the world who came here.
Yes.
Because when they come to the country, sometimes they don't know what to do. They are illegal. They don't know where to turn. They can't get any jobs. They don't have any income. And tell me about this immigration and what is the pattern that you have seen in Trinidad and Tobago over the years?
We got involved in UNHCR and refugee ministry and migrant ministry at the end of the 80s, like in 1989, when United Nations approached us and asked us if we would train for this particular type of work in our country. Of course, in those days, we did not have refugees, so I thought, well, what a strange thing to do. But anyway, we did, thank God. We did, a few of us did go into the training, and for many years we continued training for refugee and migrant ministry. In the early 90s, we would get a couple of people coming in. I remember one time we even got 2 Russians into Trinidad who arrived here seeking refuge. And that was like our first initial response to the need. And I would say from 2000, it began to happen in a very different way. And United Nations always warned us about this. You know, it doesn't look as though you're going to have any refugees, or you may not have now. But the way the world is going, people are traveling, people are moving, and it's only a matter of time before people find out about Trinidad and start to come there or use there as a transshipment place to go to somewhere else. And this did happen in the early 2000s when we got a lot of Africans crossing over the Atlantic, coming to Trinidad, and also other refugees from different countries. You know, we had from Iraq and from Iran and from Syria, and people started to come in also from the Caribbean, where we got Cubans coming in here, and quite a few Cubans at one stage did come. So the early 2000s, we started to really move with a bigger refugee and migrant ministry, and of course get more and more involved in the needs of people who are coming to us.
Okay, now I think some of the things that you said there are very important. First of all, UNHCR anticipated and saw that this was a trend that was likely to reach our shores.
Yes.
And they identified you and your organization, Living Waters, to say, hey, let's prepare for this. And let's have an institution in Trinidad and Tobago that is prepared and can deal with this.
Yes.
And then the refugees started coming, and you cared for them, you looked for them, you helped them to transition. Based on your knowledge and experience, because you can't keep a track of all of these people, let's say the initial refugees that came from Africa, from the rest of the Caribbean, from Syria, from Iraq, etc., as they made their way to Trinidad shores, you helped them and they managed themselves. Have they stayed here, or have they gone elsewhere, or is it a mix, or what?
Okay, so I would say in those days you had UNHCR would resettle refugees who came here seeking refugee status after they were determined as refugees, because I suppose they had so few here, and we in Trinidad and Tobago really did not have a policy to welcome refugees and to put them into our lives, you know. So UNHCR would have at that time resettled a lot of the refugees that came, some from Africa, some from Cuba, some from other countries, Colombia, different people that would have come from maybe Sri Lanka and places like that, Bangladesh. The refugee population was not very large. So maybe 100, 200, 300, you know, that we would be dealing with on a regular basis, maybe a little more. So a lot of those refugees would have been resettled to other countries, like would have gone to United States or to some European country that UNHCR would have organized. Some of them would have remained here, especially if the people who were here could easily enter into our life as Trinidadians. They would not, and they would not have been a priority to resettle. Sometimes families would come and would be very difficult for them to settle in Trinidad. So those would be the most vulnerable to, and we would resettle in other countries.
Okay, so UNHCR was the principal agency that kind of managed this refugee process, this displacement process, and they basically helped us outside of the policy of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of global appreciation of how these things are solved. All right, and then we have this situation where you are in the middle of now with the Venezuelan. You had the growing crisis in Venezuela. Venezuela is right over there, 7 miles away, separated by the ocean, but very close. And you had this increasing crisis in Venezuela. You have a political problem. You have economic problems. You have social disruption. You have basically authoritarian and military rule. And people then leave the shores, they go everywhere. I have maps with me because I'm paying some attention to this thing together with other colleagues that show all the countries in the world to which Venezuelans have gone. But we, because we are so near, we got a substantial number of them. Tell us, from your point of view, watching them come here one by one, then by scores, then by hundreds, what you have seen in the evolution of Venezuelan migration to Trinidad and Tobago.
I would say at the beginning of people coming here from Venezuela, we would have got at that stage people who were professionals. A lot of the migrants would have been professionals at that time.
When did that start?
Around 2015, 2016.
Okay, all right.
And 2017 is when it really opened up, 2017
Escalated.
and 18.
Yes.
But from earlier on, from 15, 16, some will come in, and then we saw, of course, more and more increase. For 2017, 2018, a lot started to come then. But at the beginning, we got a lot of professional people, doctors, nurses, lawyers, different people who are professionals in their own right. And we got quite a lot of those. And as the time went on, we would get more and more people who were just starving and suffering. I guess maybe if the first set of people were involved more in the political atmosphere there, and for some reason or another, they left. And by the time, after some years, you would get people leaving Venezuela like we have now, because they're just very hungry, and their kids are very hungry, their families, they cannot sustain any kind of life with them. They have no jobs, and so it's just desperation, really. People just leave in desperation. I mean, when you would get onto a boat, or even send your child on a boat to another country, that must be total desperation for people to do that, something like that. So we did get absolute desperate cases later on in the journey of this migration. Yeah.
Based on your estimation, because it would only be an estimate, how many Venezuelans you think there are in Trinidad and Tobago now? The officially registered amount is about 16,000. The re-registration is a little less than that. And you have a situation in which we have had numbers from 60,000 to 120,000 Venezuelans. And I think people know, they sense from living in Trinidad and Tobago that, you know, you have Venezuelans ubiquitously all over the country. What would you guess, and I know it's a guess, I don't want at all to try and put you on the spot. What would you guess is likely to be the number of Venezuelans here, realistically?
Yeah. Well, as you say, that's a very, very difficult question to answer. And I think everybody in Trinidad would like to know how many refugees are here. But we really do not have an idea.
The numbers.
That's true. We have no idea of the numbers. We know it's thousands and thousands of people. As you say, 16,000 people have registered with the government registration, and thanks be to God for that. And there would be maybe another 10,000 other than that, or maybe 8,000 other than that have registered with UNHCR. And maybe many other people, maybe double that amount that are registered, yes.
Yes. Well, it's a significant number. And how, I mean, you said originally these people might have been professionals. Did a lot of them use here as a jumping off point to go somewhere else? Or are some of them still here? And what is happening now with the Venezuelan community and your relationship with them and the UNHCR and so on?
Well, I would say that a lot of the ones that came here at the beginning, a lot of them are still here. Many of them do leave and do go on. We never hear all the stories, of course. We don't know, but we know that both things happen. Some stay and some go on. I guess what is possible for people. But what I would say, it has been very difficult for most of them, most Venezuelans. It has been very, very difficult for them to remain in Trinidad, to find a life. They struggle a lot. It does not come easy, and it is a very complicated situation and a very desperate situation for many of them. The ones that have come recently in the last couple of years, and the big influx of people that have come, of course, a lot of them are very poor people. And if they were not poor when they left Venezuela, when they arrive in Trinidad after a couple of months, they are extremely poor. And they are on the fringes of society and very, very vulnerable. And I mean, when we think of the poorest of the poor in our communities, I mean, they must be part of that category. Very, very difficult for them.
Yes. And of course, under pandemic conditions where we are now, where so many Trinidadians have lost jobs, and you have increasing poverty and vulnerability here. Yeah. And you have these people now who cannot get jobs. There is no way that they can get their income. You really have a serious problem here now.
Serious problem. Oh, it's very serious. And I mean, you can actually see people losing weight and getting thin, from lack of food. And many times when, we find families that have had very little to eat for a weekend, by the time someone gets some food to them and a food parcel to them, they haven't had anything to eat for a weekend. Now, I know in Trinidad, too, we have a lot of poor people as well. And the scenario is not good. I guess, as you say, pandemic time, COVID time has proved very, very stressful.
Large numbers of people.
And make it more difficult.
So, and how, in that economically stressful condition, how does Living Waters help them? Do you work with the government? Do you work with the private sector? Do you work with UNHCR? And how does all of this work in favor of some kind of help or sustenance to these immigrants? And I imagine you still look after poor people in Trinidad.
Plenty poor people in Trinidad. More poor people in Trinidad. Yes, UNHCR never had an office here until about 2017, 2018, when I really recommended to them it was time they opened an office here, especially to assist with this migration from Venezuela. So we have worked closely with them since the inception, of course, since in the 80s. But having that team here, we work closely with them. We work with other stakeholders as well, international stakeholders who assist us. We become their partners and we implement stuff and programs for different organizations, international organizations. And we work closely together with the government as well. Now, since 2013, we had a procedure, a policy was put in place and approved by Cabinet, and we worked that policy together with the government, and we used to have regular stakeholders meetings and so on. We journeyed together. Since the big influx in 2019, and then the coming of COVID, that type of meeting and stakeholders meeting has been put on the side, for now, the side burner for now, but hopefully soon we will be getting back with that. But all along we have worked with the government, we have worked with the government of the day, we have worked with immigration, we have worked with the police, and we have worked with the UNHCR and international organizations. So I always say our community, Living Water community, within the church, and within the secular society, we work with everyone. We are here as partners for everyone, for the betterment of civilization, for our sisters and brothers, and for our country right here where we live.
Okay. Are we taking the immigration situation in Trinidad and Tobago seriously enough, or are we just letting things happen and hoping that it will kind of resolve itself? I don't know if I'm asking the right question here.
Yeah,
but
I understand
I'm kind of prompting you to speak.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, Bhoe, I've worked, and our community has worked with all governments since the inception of this ministry in particular. And every government, it has been a concern. I don't think any government per se would say, well, let's not worry about that. Let's just leave it, let it happen itself. I think it has been a concern. And recently, of course, with this influx, it has been a concern and a great concern, I think, for the government. And they have tried, I would say, as the former governments too, have really tried to put things in place so that we would have some sort of immigration procedure for migrants that come into the country. We do have a procedure, and we did have, and it worked well for a while and for a few years, but because of the influx of the Venezuelans, of course, it was impossible to keep that procedure going because it was not made for the thousands of people. So when we move from a few hundred people to many thousands of people, the system has to change. Excuse me. Yeah, the system has to change. And so it's to look what is the best way to do that. That's what's important. And of course, that takes a lot of dialogue, a lot of openness, and a lot of understanding of the situation. And coming at a time like COVID, when we have such a crisis in our own country for our own people, of course, it is a big, big challenge for the government and for everyone. But I must say, I think, we work with the business community, we work with the private sector, we work with individuals, we work with families, and we have had support from right across the board. We really have had a lot of support. Of course, you have some people who don't want any refugees in the country and don't want any, they want to have to deal with that. So, and they make their voices heard much more Because you can have 5 people that make the noise of 1,000 other people, and that always happens, I think. But so that's, I think, is a crisis here. But a lot of people understand the refugee crisis. I mean, I know in all the churches, and not only the Catholic churches, the other churches and the other faiths too, the Hindu and Muslim faith, work with the refugee situation here and help refugees in our country and migrants.
You know, the disposition is an important thing. I mean, I will share these numbers with you because I've been looking at them. Over 30% of the people in the United States who are not born there are from the Caribbean and Latin America.
Yes.
Caribbean people are a high migration people.
Yeah.
There are Caribbean diasporas almost in
All over the
every
world.
major city in the world. So it is not like we do not become immigrants and refugees elsewhere and seek solace and opportunity elsewhere. So I would think that the Caribbean position, regardless of the country that you live, and Trinidad and Tobago is key in all of this because we also have people all over. I would think that the disposition would be to understand that there are many displaced people in the world, that some of them are asylum seekers, some of them are refugees, some of them are immigrants looking for a better life because where they have been living have turned out not to be amenable to their own welfare, whether for political or economic reasons or whatever. And I would think that the disposition here would be better. But do you find that to be so, or do you sense a certain amount of hostility? And, I want to ask you a quick question after that. Recently, we had people from Venezuela who had been here for a little time simply deciding to go back home. They took a boat and went back home. How do you respond to that kind of thing?
Yeah. I think a lot of people in Trinidad understand, and as you say, we all know people who have left the country, who have migrated. We all know people who go illegally into other countries and stay there until they can fix up their business. We all know that, and we know that Trinidadians are all over the place doing that. And maybe that's why people here do have a heart for migrants and refugees. But there's still a group of people in Trinidad and Tobago, and I guess in the Caribbean, that don't want migrants in Trinidad. They don't want. They just don't want them here, and they're very, very loud about it, and they speak out against it, and they make a lot of noise. And we get that. Yes, we get that. That's a definite part of the life of immigrants. And that is part, too, of why they decide to leave. Those people who have decided to go back to Venezuela, it's not because they're going back to something great. But when they arrived in Trinidad, they could not imagine the difficult life that they have had to live. Excuse me. They could not imagine how difficult it would have been. And maybe for some people, it was even more difficult than where they came from. I mean, we find families living in the bushes, in the forest in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, could you imagine that? It's just horrendous, the stories that we hear. And their life here, the Venezuelan, most of them, their life here is very, very, very difficult. I'm saddened to see that they would all decide to go back. I mean, I know people myself who have gone back, and it saddens me to know that they've had to leave our country to go back, that they did not find welcome here, that their life here was even more in danger than in Venezuela. And it saddens me to see that as a people, that we can't welcome and integrate people into our lives and into our country are people who are seeking asylum because they are so desperate that they have to leave. Nobody wants to leave home. Nobody wants to
Yes,
leave their country.
of course.
It's desperation that makes people do it.
Now, we come into the end of the program, and I'm going to have to close. I wonder if you could close on saying, if there are 3 things that you would like to see done in Trinidad and Tobago to help regularize this situation and make it more amenable to the Venezuelans who are here, understanding that we are going through a rough time ourselves as a country, what would those 2 or 3 things be?
I would say, Bhoe, one of the things definitely would be education for the children. We have thousands of children here that cannot be educated, and the system does not allow education in our public schools. However, the government has agreed and said that, the Catholic churches and the other faiths, they can take in. So that hopefully that can happen when school opens. We have been educating people as well, but of course just a few, or maybe just over 1,000 we have in our own schools right now, education programs. But there are thousands of other children. So I would say definitely one of the main things would be the education for children. It's too long that these kids don't have education, and as you know what that would bring in the future. We don't want to see that. So that I would say yes. I would also say that I would really like people in Trinidad and Tobago to open their hearts. We have become such a coarse people. That's not Trinis, man. That's not how we are. We always known to be a welcoming and a loving and kind people. And as I say, many of us are like that. Many of the people, too many people now are angry, and they're selfish and don't want to share even a little bit, even the half a loaf of bread that we have, to share with those who do not have. Everybody wants what they want for themselves. They want to build their own kingdoms, and they're not concerned about other people. So I would say, as far as people in Trinidad and Tobago are concerned, not all, but some people, most people, if we can look towards building a culture of caring and welcoming people, that really, really always gets to me, how we can be so horrible to people who come into our country in need.
All right. We are going to have to close now, Rhonda. This has been a very, very heartwarming and what can I say, interesting and, a generation of concern by the conversation that we have. And I want to thank you for your contribution, not only to the lives of so many people, but to come in here and sharing it with us. We'll see whether we can maybe on some occasion continue this discussion. But I want to thank you for coming. Have a wonderful day today. And we hope that we can do something better for the poor in our own country, because we have a challenge now. And we hope also that we can do something for these Venezuelan immigrants, which make them feel more welcome and more a part of this society. Thank you very much for talking with us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we move on now to Chanel Alciran and the news. Thank you very much.